Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when you are listening to this. Welcome to my assembly. You are listening to Ms Osman. I would like to start by asking you to have a look at the images on slide 1. Have a think about what today's assembly might be about if these two images are a really good representation of the topic. So you may have already guessed the topic, you may have guessed ideas around the topic, and now I'm going to ask you to do some self-reflection that hopefully will get you closer to guessing what the topic is. So how do you feel when you do the right thing, even if sometimes it's not always the easiest thing to do? And do you think it's important to do the right thing even if no one is watching? So as you're reflecting and you're asking yourself why that may be important, you'll be getting even closer to guessing the topic for today's assembly. So before I tell you what the topic is, I'm going to give you one more chance to have a guess. I'm going to go through 3 case studies and I want you to consider what you would do if you were in these positions and why. So the first one, you're at the corner shop picking up essentials for your family. The total cost of all of the items is £4. You give the cashier a £10 note. The cashier gives you your change and you leave the store. You don't notice until you walk out of the door, but the cashier has accidentally given you £8 back instead of £6. What would you do and why? Number 2, you've borrowed a video camera from school so that you can complete a project. Whilst you're walking around the academy, you trip and drop the camera. You notice a crack on the lens, but you're not sure if it was there before. You check to make sure the camera still works. It does. What do you do and why? And lastly, your class is taking a maths test. Your teacher has her head down for a moment and the person next to you leans over and whispers, "Psst, what's your answer for question 4? What do you do and why?" So I'm sure that you all have integrity at the forefront of your minds, or you've written it down, or perhaps you're having a conversation with someone at home about the topic of integrity. You may have written down these words instead: responsibility, respect, fairness, trustworthiness, or even honesty. And that's because all of those topics and all of those synonyms are heavily intertwined with our topic of integrity. So I'm going to start by really defining integrity and its importance. Integrity is the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles. It's derived from the Latin integer, which is a whole number, and therefore it refers to the state of being complete. So I'd like you to think of a few examples of integrity in a number of scenarios, and then when you've done that, I'd like you to watch a video which is hyperlinked on the slide, and you can watch in more detail the exploration of the word integrity. But first, let's have a think about these things. Can you think of examples of ways in which students should behave with integrity at school? What about in the workplace? What about in the community? And what about during this global pandemic? Can you think of a goal you have in the future? How do you think having integrity will help you achieve this goal? So who is Marcus Rashford and how has he shown integrity recently? Well, the Manchester United and England striker is the young man who took on the Prime Minister and his government, persuading them to reverse the decision on school meal vouchers, which guarantees that 1.3 million children will now be fed during the summer holidays. For Marcus, it has been a deeply personal crusade, and one that has its foundations in a difficult upbringing as one of 5 children raised by a single mother. The 22-year-old has not forgotten his roots. Prime Minister Boris Johnson praised the England star contribution to the debate around poverty. The footballer said he was grateful that the Prime Minister did change his decision and that in a phone call, Mr Johnson had thanked him for using what I've built in a positive manner. Rashford owes his thanks to his mother, saying that she instilled the importance of good values into him from an early age. And this is something I'd like to explore in more detail on the next slide. I'm sure you've already seen this very powerful image that's been circulating the news and media and social media across the last week. During last week's Black Lives Matter protests and demonstrations, a counter-demonstration took place which opposed the Black Lives Matter movement. The counter-protest was in parts violent and racist. However, a Black Lives Matter protester was seen to act with the utmost integrity when he noticed a counter-protester was in need. He and others acted decisively to help the man, carrying the counter-protester to safety. Describing his decision to step in, Patrick Hutchinson said, "His life was under threat, so I just went under, scooped him up, put him on my shoulders, and started marching towards the police with him." He said, "You don't think about it being scary at the time, you just do what you've got to do." Now, what's really important about this is that Hutchinson described and contrasted the intervention with the lack of action taken by Minneapolis police officers who were involved in the tragic killing of George Floyd. If the other 3 police officers that were standing around when George Floyd was murdered had thought about intervening and stopping their colleague from doing what he was doing like we did, said Hutchinson, George Floyd would be alive today. He added, "I just want equality for all of us. At the moment, the scales are unfairly balanced, and I just want things to be fair for my children and my grandchildren." So Rashford mentioned that acting with integrity was something that was instilled within him from his mother from an early age. So that's something that's really important for us to explore. Integrity is not something we're either born with or not. It's something that derives from our experiences and our conscious choices. In the same way, we're not born with honesty or honour or respect or trustworthiness. Just like integrity, we acquire these values perhaps from our own role models or social circles or from personal experiences and individuals that have influence over our lives. Psychological studies, however, prove that we are born with an innate ability to empathise. This allows our character to develop and reflect on other actions we may wish to uphold, such as responsibility, fairness, and respect. So just because you have not acted with integrity in an isolated experience, or perhaps a few experiences, it doesn't mean that you can't make the choice to do so next time. It's something that young people and adults need to continuously work on and improve. The decision to act with integrity is first a conscious one, but it moves to the unconscious when it becomes a habit, just like most things. So for example, in my own life, my own experience, I consciously was picking up other people's litter and recycling it. And this is now something I do unconsciously when I'm walking around, especially around our school, but definitely around the community in which I live in. So remember that what's really important about integrity is doing the right thing, even when there's no one there to see you. So we've just explored 2 examples that have happened in the last week where people have acted with the utmost integrity, but I could show you hundreds, if not thousands more. But let's explore integrity a little bit more and work out how we can ensure that we are doing it in our everyday lives. So to live a life of integrity, you must be honest with yourself and others. You must tell the truth, even when it's not an easy thing to do. You must do the right thing, even when there's no one to see you do the right thing. You need to ask for help if you need it. If you give your word, you have to ensure that you deliver on it. You need to make sure that you have strong moral values and that you are conscious of upholding these. So let's have one more look at a 30-second example on YouTube of someone deciding to act with integrity. In the first YouTube video, which was slightly lengthier and explored the definition of integrity, the concept of dual morality was raised, and I want to explore this in a bit more depth. Dual meaning consisting of having 2 parts, and morality consisting of the principles that concern the distinction between right and wrong or good and bad decisions. Stephen Fritz argued people find themselves in trouble when they possess a dual morality. What he means by that is the concept that one person might present a set of moral decisions or actions, but reverse these behaviours when they face temptation or the moment is convenient for them. And so I want us to remember the quote which we've brought up a few times in this assembly, that having integrity is about acting or doing the right thing even when no one is watching, even in the face of temptation, or even when the moment is convenient for you to do so. So I'd like to explore this case study, as I believe it raises one of dual morality, and I'd like to see if by the end of it you think that Dominic Cummings acted with integrity or not. Dominic Cummings is the advisor to the Prime Minister, and on the 23rd of March, the Prime Minister told the UK that they must stay at home. People were warned not to meet friends or family members they do not live with. Those with symptoms have already been told to self-isolate. 4 days later, Mr. Cummings is seen leaving 10 Downing Street, saying, "I suddenly got a call from my wife, who was looking after our 4-year-old child. She told me she suddenly felt very ill. So he went home, but after a couple of hours, his wife felt better and he returned to work." The government guidance here would state that if Mr. Cummings believed his wife may have had coronavirus, the guidance was that all household members who remain well must stay at home and not leave the house for 14 days. That evening, Mr. Cummings went on to explain that he returned home and discussed the situation with his wife. She was definitely ill. She might have COVID, although she did not have a cough or a fever. Mr. Cummings said that many people he worked closely with, including the Prime Minister, had had symptoms or were absent with symptoms. He said, "I thought there was a distinct probability that I had already caught the disease." Later, Mr. Cummings drove up to Durham with his family, arriving at roughly midnight. "I was worried that if my wife and I were both seriously ill, possibly hospitalised, there was nobody in London he could reasonably ask to look after his child and expose themselves to COVID." Just to return to the government guidance here, it is stay at home is the simple government advice for households where one or more members have coronavirus symptoms. The government page on essential travel stated, "Essential travel does not include visits to second homes, whether for isolation purposes or holidays. People must remain in their primary residence." So on the 12th of April, Mr. Cummings drives to Barnard Castle, which is about 25 miles from his parents' home in Durham, with his wife and his child. He explained that this episode, as needing to test his driving and his eyesight, was fine, before he had to make the long drive back to London. He said he'd been having problems with his vision and that he was driving the 25 miles to check his eyesight. Now, the 1988 Road Traffic Act states if a person drives a motor vehicle on a road while his eyesight is such, whether through a defect which cannot be, or one which is not for the time being sufficiently corrected, that he cannot simply, with any requirement as to eyesight prescriptions under the part of the Act for the purposes of tests or competence to drive, he is therefore guilty of an offence. And the Highway Code says you must report to the driver and vehicle licensing agency any health condition likely to affect your driving. So in summary, after all of this was put to Dominic Cummings, he insisted he did not break the law. He said, "I believe that in all the circumstances, I behaved reasonably and legally, balancing the safety of my family and the extreme situation in number 10. The legal rules do not cover the circumstances I found myself in." So I ask you this, considering all of the evidence that has been kind of brought to you on this slide, do you believe that Dominic Cummings acted with integrity or not? Having explored integrity in depth in this assembly, I want to leave you with some examples, some really common ones that you can start ensuring that you're doing in your own lives, in your communities, and especially at our academy. So, being on time, returning items to lost property, finishing schoolwork and homework to 100% of your ability, admitting and learning from mistakes, following rules and reporting when others have broken them, being honest with others, being true to yourself, working well with others as a team, apologising if you hurt someone's feelings, not cutting corners, accepting people as they are, surrounding yourself with honest people, kindly letting others know when they are not acting with integrity, being mindful of others, completing what you set out to do, doing something because it needs to be done, cleaning up a mess even if you didn't make it. So I'm going to leave you with a few sentences I'd like you to finish. But before I do that, you may have noticed the purple box which has appeared on the last few slides, and it reads, "Integrity is doing the right thing even when there is no one there to see you." I want this sentence and this phrase to become a mantra for you. I want it to be something that you say back to yourself and that you remember and keep close to you. I want it to be something that you say to other people to impart them with the wisdom of integrity, because it's doing something that is right, not so that you can be given praise. That should come, and I'm sure that will come, but it's something that you do because you know it's the right thing to do, even if there's no one to see you do it. So, can you finish these sentences for me? To have integrity, you must be, and I want 4 separate criteria, please. Thank you for listening.